Hello everybody, welcome to Revolutionary Lumpen Radio with your host Shibby. We'll get into the recording with Tara and their interview in just a sec. But just want to say, if you did find this useful, please remember to support us on Patreon at patreon.com/lumpenpodcast. You also get bonus access to certain material, and you also get to ask our guests questions of your choosing for future upcoming interviews. Apart from that, you can find everything that we do at Linktree in the show notes. Linktree/RevLumpenRadio. Here's the recording with Tara. Thanks again for tuning into Revolutionary Lumpen Radio. In this episode, we're joined by Comrade Tara, an organiser and activist, the self-described Palestinian woman from occupied Jerusalem and occupied Jaffa. Welcome to the pod, Tara. I'm very humbled to have you on.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Yeah, pleasure. So as always, you like to start off our show with a background question to get a sense of who we're talking to on the show here. So if you could just go into as much detail as you'd be willing to share on your background, political activity, any political tendency or ideology that you might subscribe to, that would go a long way before we jump into the subject matter. Thanks.
Yeah, of course. So my name is Tara. I'm a graduate student right now. I live in Montreal, which is actually Geojage, and it's unceded Haudenosaunee territory. I first started organizing, like you mentioned, I'm from occupied Jerusalem and occupied Jaffa, but I lived in Jordan my entire life because that's where my family was exiled to in 1948. But I kind of started organizing and becoming really politically engaged when I came to university and was involved with basically campus organizing. And that's what happens when you go to a university that's extremely Zionist. You kind of get lumped into this whole thing and you're sort of forced to do something about it if you really care. As far as politics, my old username on Twitter used to be Tara the Commie. But now I changed it, so I would say I'm a communist. And yeah, I feel like my politics kind of center around Palestine as a national liberation struggle, and then everything sort of came out of that.
That's quite a background compared to obviously the average working class white person in Britain. You've never heard of their families get fucking exiled from a country to another country. What the hell is that about? What have you got to do to get exiled? What happened?
What do you need to do to be exiled? Nothing except be Palestinian, living in your homeland, living on Palestinian land. What happened basically was that Zionists first started settling in Palestine in the early 1900s, and after the Nakba, which translates to catastrophe in Arabic, in 1947, 1948, my family, both sides of my family, became refugees essentially. They actually didn't go straight to Jordan. Most of them didn't go straight to Jordan. They became refugees in Egypt and then Lebanon, and then they ended up settling in Jordan.
Sorry to interrupt, just to give context, how were they getting about and traveling to all these places?
Part of it was, through land mostly. So either not walking, as far as I know. I don't remember my grandparents telling me stories about walking, but mostly through land with other refugees. And they would just cross the borders because, as you know, Lebanon is close to the northern side of Palestine. So Jaffa is kind of close to that, so that's where they ended up first. Gaza is close to Egypt. I don't have any family from Gaza, but my family ended up going from Lebanon to Egypt or back and forth, and then they ended up going to Jordan, which is closest to Jerusalem. So yeah, that's how they ended up there. And this is actually how we go back to Palestine to visit. We go through what we call the bridge through land. We drive from Jordan through the bridge to be able to enter into Palestine.
Do Israel know that, or do I need to cut that out?
Oh, they know it. Yeah, we're not sneaking in. We're going through their borders. Yeah, no need to cut that out. Actually, I had a pretty mild experience at the border the one time that I visited, but now I'm sort of expecting a worse experience because it's been a few years.
So, how many people do you think share that story that you've just told me with this, exact same similar scenario? Israel literally committing colonialism, taking land and then displacing the native population. Do you know many people who've gone through that personally?
Personally, so many because I lived in Jordan, which is about more or less 50% Palestinian refugees that have been coming since 1947 essentially, but in big waves, hundreds of thousands of people in 1947, 1948, hundreds of thousands more people in 1967, which was another war, and people sort of come in waves. There were people coming during the first and the second Intifada, people coming from Gaza still because of the blockade if they managed to get through. But personally, I know many people, but the actual number is now millions of Palestinian refugees because I'm third generation Palestinian refugees. So yeah.
What do you think would happen to the people if they never fled and they never become refugees and they decided that they were going to stay?
Well, what's happening right now, which is just enduring ethnic cleansing and genocide and settler colonialism on the ground, whether you're living in the 1948 occupied territories, which are now known as Israel. So the Palestinian citizens that stayed in that area essentially became Israeli citizens, and the Palestinians who didn't stay there but stayed in occupied Jerusalem and the occupied West Bank and Gaza are not so-called Israeli citizens. But yeah, what you do is what would happen to the people who stayed there is just that you resist ethnic cleansing. You're still under occupation. I mean, the entirety of Palestine is under military occupation. There are more than 4,500 political prisoners, hundreds of whom are children. If you end up in Gaza, which not many people know, the population of Gaza is refugees from the 1948 occupied territories that were fleeing during the 1947-1948 Nakba and ended up fleeing to Gaza and are now living in an open-air prison, enduring a blockade that's been going on for about 17 years, an air, land, and sea blockade. So yeah, the people who ended up leaving, or not leaving, that's the wrong word. The people who ended up being displaced and dispossessed are, resisting the ethnic cleansing, but in a very different way than the people who are on the ground.
Oh, hell no.
I know.
Just to wrap your head around that, I mean, so most of our listeners, I mean, we get listeners like internationally, but like most of our listeners are like obviously in the Imperial Corps. And, when you're in the Imperial Corps, you're born in I was born in like the Women's Hospital in Liverpool. People are just born in fucking hospitals, obviously, free healthcare, all of that. We've got baby milk or baby formula, or we can have breast milk. There's always food there for the kids. We've always got tap water there. We've always got a roof over our heads. We don't have checkpoints. But the Palestinians, pretty sure it's like 97% of all the water is not drinkable in Palestine. As for the hospitals, you can have hospitals, but they do actually get fucking bombed by Israel still. As for the education, again, it's just what the fuck do you do with all this going on?
Right.
You know what I'm saying? It's like they're constantly resisting, and it burns me cap out that like people in the Imperial Corps wave Palestinian flags and that, but maybe not properly comprehend the trauma and the devastation that actually takes place. So, thanks for coming on to just try and, give people a more realistic impression of what's actually taking place. And it goes a lot further with your voice rather than mine, obviously.
No, of course. Thanks for inviting me. I mean, the situation that you described about, not having clean drinking water, not having your hospitals bombed by the occupation, lacking supplies that are necessary for life. what I think is that this has been the situation in Gaza because of the blockade. But the people of Gaza have become, even though they are living in this open air prison, and I feel like that's like an understatement to call it an open air prison, but they are the nucleus of resistance in Palestine in the way that they're steadfast in their resistance. Especially in Gaza, there's a high literacy rate. We have people who are educated, there are universities, there are all of these things, but what's the larger context of that? It's that they're living in an open air prison that's being bombed every few years when the occupation feels like they want to conduct a massacre because they want to win an election, or because there was retaliation from resistance in the West Bank, or because there was, for example, an operation from Jenin, an operation inside the 1948 territories. And so even though they go through all of this, even though they're resisting those massacres, even though they're being killed by the occupation, they're still living, which I think is, one of the most important things that we need to remember, is how steadfast they are in their resistance, primarily through living. And then obviously we know that the center of Palestinian armed resistance is in Gaza, the armed resistance groups that also have factions in the occupied West Bank.
Holy shit. Wow. Yeah, there is a lot. Just their resistance at just staying alive is just mind blowing to me. But yeah, obviously true. As for its maybe not being the right word as an open air prison, it unquestionably is a testing ground for some of the largest arms manufacturers on the planet. And as we talk about, British and US imperialism, I mean, that, Israel's essentially just like, after World War II, it seems like America and Britain just said, you know what, we want a permanent military base in the Middle East. The Jews want a homeland. Why don't we give them that? And then we can just use that as a base for US and British imperialism. So they facilitated that for Israel in the form of hundreds of billions, maybe even trillions of pounds or dollars in development. And what you see is obviously colonialism taking place, the ethnic cleansing, which again, all these words don't do it justice. It's literally murdering like innocent people and traumatizing them until they eventually do get killed. Like, I think it's 50% of the population in Palestine's kids, and I think it's like 91% of them like all want to fucking die or some shit. Like, they're fucking terrified. They've got like PTSD, and they're not even like 4 years old. They're 4 wars old.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? It's fucked.
Yeah, so it's a very different just way of living compared to how I lived as a Palestinian in exile just a few kilometers away in Jordan. I wanted to talk more about the Imperial Corps and Britain's and the US's involvement. So you're right, it is a permanent military base in the Levant. Like, this is one of their goals that essentially now has been achieved. But Zionism as an ideology came, which this is analysis that comes from a Syrian Palestinian scholar called Fayez Sayegh, and he wrote a book about Zionist colonialism. But Zionism came as a response to rising anti-Semitism in Europe, to essentially Jews being persecuted in Europe. And it was very unpopular at first because it was very honest in the way that it's a settler colonial ideology that is meant to create an ethno-state. Not necessarily in Palestine. There were other states, other lands that were sort of like on their roster of colonization, and they ended up choosing Palestine because the angle of the Holy Land and religious ties is a very strategic way to co-opt religion as a vessel for settler colonialism. And so that's how it started in the late 1800s. And you can see very clearly that Britain and the US saw this as an opportunity to plant themselves in the region. We know that Palestine, before Zionist colonialism or before like 1948, was a British mandate. And we also know that in 1917, a declaration was signed, the Balfour Declaration, which basically came from Britain saying, yes, European Jews deserve a homeland, and we believe that this homeland is Palestine. And so it is their eternal right to live in that land. And that's how these settlements started. They started in the late 1800s, and they just progressively became more and more popular with rising anti-Semitism in Europe, but also with people realizing that their class and social interests lie in colonizing Palestinian land just through these connections with the imperial core. You know, all of this happened, and this is how Zionist nation building began. Nation building as a product of establishing an ethno-state. And so when we think of Zionism, it's really important to think about it as an ethnic self-segregation ideology. These colonizers are coming from a land to occupy another land and to then displace the native population and segregate themselves from the native population. And this is happening now, even when we're talking about the 1948 occupied territories. And that's what's really frustrating about when people say that the occupation has been going on for 5 decades. No, the occupation has been going on for almost 75 years now. Even if you're a so-called Israeli citizen, but you're a Palestinian living in that land, you're still experiencing that ethnic self-segregation. They're just way more strategic about it. For example, just a very small example, Palestinians living in those areas have their own neighborhoods that are usually not as affluent as other neighborhoods. Palestinians in those areas don't have their own daycare facilities. You know, for every, I don't know, dozens of so-called Israeli daycares, there's just a few Palestinian daycare facilities, and so mothers are forced to take care of their children while the fathers are forced to provide for the family. And so you end up in this cycle of just repression and ethnic cleansing and just an effort to completely erase your Palestinian identity. So it's not just about those checkpoints. It's also about those people living in the 1948 occupied territories who are also resisting ethnic cleansing. For example, one of the main things that Zionist propagandists do is that they call Palestinians living in the 1948 occupied territories Arabs. But they're not Arabs, they're Palestinian. And that's just one of the ways to erase Palestinian presence on the land. And so they say that that the Arabs and the Jews live together on that land, but, you know, we all know that those people are Palestinian, and we all know that it's not a conflict between Arabs and Jews or between Muslims and Jews. And so all of this is just a way to distort the reality of what's going on the ground, which is that a genocidal settler colonial ethno-state is being established on Palestinian land from the river to the sea. Not just after the 1967 borders, not just before the 1967 borders. All of historic Palestine is occupied, and all of the Palestinian people living in Palestine are occupied people, and all of the Palestinian people who have been forced to leave Palestine are Palestinians living in exile. They're refugees that are refused the right to return. All of my grandparents, they all died in exile. They all died as refugees. They were never able to go back home. And so, yeah, I don't know. I went on a tangent. Now I don't know how I started this.
Thank you for that contribution there. I mean, we've heard a lot about what goes on in Palestine. Obviously, if people want to see what that looks like, it does literally just look like fucking people being shot dead while they're fleeing away, teens, kids. Fucking, it doesn't matter. And you say that everybody knows it's not just Arabs versus Jews. But I remember when I was like maybe 16 or 17 or something, and I actually watched Don't Mess the Zohan. Have you ever seen that?
I have heard about it, never watched it though.
And like, that had me convinced that it was just a bunch of 1,000-year war between like Israelis and Arabs, and they're all just throwing shit at each other on the opposite end of the street, and then fucking Adam Sandler, who's a fucking Jewish, he comes along in the middle of them and he's like, let's just all get along and that. But I mean, like that's the propaganda that they put out, and it just to make it say there's just like it's all just religious people, all just with opposite religions, and that's all it is. When, if you look into the government's own legislation, that Balfour Declaration, for example, full well that they knew Palestinians was there, they knew full well that they'd resist. What the fuck, you know what I mean? And then everything else is just bullshit propaganda. And it's the kind of propaganda that, like, even Zionists, like, believe, some Zionists, like, believe their own fucking fascist bullshit, and I mean, well, I guess they all do.
Yeah,
thanks for clarifying that. And we've heard so much about the resistance, like, within Palestine, the people becoming martyrs. Like, obviously, I'll ask you a question now, and it's gonna be like another tough one, really, because it's the kind of question where if everybody had an answer for it, we'd all be doing it, hopefully. And that would be like, it would genuinely be a mistake for me to not actually ask it from like somebody Palestinian background, family, and tied so close to the heart, to the land. In your mind and your experience, do you think that the people of the Imperial Core are doing enough? Especially when so much of the terror actually comes from the Imperial Core to facilitate the Palestinian ethnic cleansing. How do you feel about the support that you see from over here? Do you think that there's anything that the people of the Imperial Core could do or improve on in supporting the Palestinian resistance?
Yeah, that is a loaded question. Are the people of the Imperial Core doing enough? As long as the Imperial Core exists, then the people who are in the Imperial Core benefiting from the Imperial Core and all the suffering and terror that is happening at the hands of the Imperial Core, I think we can say that not enough is being done. But that has a lot to do with everything you mentioned about propaganda, right? And so, first of all, recognizing that you have been inundated with this propaganda. Even me living in Jordan, which is a very close ally with the United States, and has been essentially slowly but surely normalizing with the occupation, for example, by doing a gas deal with the occupation and now building a gate between Jordanian and Palestinian borders. Even me living there was a lot of propaganda for me to get over, right? And so being in the Imperial Core, the first thing that needs to happen is acknowledgement of that propaganda. And also acknowledgement of what I just said, which is as long as the Imperial Core exists, then people in the Imperial Core who are the main beneficiaries of the existence of imperialism, then not enough is being done. But all of that being said, for me, direct action is the best way to combat the Imperial Core's, atrocities. Like you said, you mentioned at some point that Gaza is like a testing ground for all of these weapons that are manufactured by UK corporations or by American corporations or Canadian corporations. The Imperial Core is producing these weapons and is producing that death and is producing the maiming of Palestinians and other people in the global south. It's not just Palestinians. And so having that be the primary target, protests are amazing, right? Like, it's a good boost for the morale to see everyone on the ground. You see people, you're like, oh wow, like there's actually so much support. But then what are you doing after that? Are you just going home, posting a few pictures on Instagram with the Palestinian flag or with your signs? Or are you actually doing something to achieve what you're chanting in the protests, right? Like, people are saying Palestine would be free from the river to the sea, or people are saying, end the occupation. Well, how are you going to end the occupation? The Imperial Core is the primary the primary force behind that occupation. You go and shut those weapons factories down, for example. I would even say you skip all of those legislative things, you skip all of those electoral politics things, you skip all of those trying to implement, pro-Palestine people into politics, for example, like Rashida Tlaib, or all of those Palestinians that have made it into the US Congress somehow. I would say skip all of that and go to the source of all the suffering. And so I see you have Join Palestine Action behind you. Join Palestine Action, do something. Exactly, dismantle the war machine, shut Al-Bad down. That's real material, that has a material effect on what's going on in the ground. If you're shutting an entire weapons factory down, then who's sending those weapons from that factory? Those weapons are just not being sent, period. And so, yeah, I feel like that's the first step in starting to do enough.
Yeah, and you're the communist, bit of Marxist, aren't you? So the critique's not all bad. Critique's good. That's what we want. If we are to take politics and development and progress seriously, we absolutely have to critique each other in our practicing and learn from that. If we're gonna we're listening to fucking Palestinian. You know what I mean? You're getting told, look, we love your protest. It shows a lot of support. Get you a load of social capital and likes on social media and social validation. But guess what? It doesn't actually do any material difference to the people in Palestine. And, obviously, and it comes down to propaganda again, basically, because you've got the old guard communist organizations or just or sort of progressive people in the United Kingdom or the US, and that's all I've ever known. Protest, that's all I've ever known. Handing out flyers, that's all I've ever known. Inviting people to a film show to learn about something and then go home and then intellectually masturbate about it. That's all they've known, but that is not enough. Obviously, it's not enough because it continues to fucking happen, doesn't it? And it doesn't even continue to fucking slow down. I mean, again, at the same time, I'm open to criticism here because, only history can tell, what the correct practice is and what isn't good enough. But I'm just looking at the old guard, the people who were protesting 10, 20, 30, 40 years before me. What have they accomplished? Nothing. Because I'm looking at all this going on and I see Palestine Action coming about and Palestine Action saying the same thing. It's not enough. These protests aren't enough. This is something I've said as a communist anyway, as a revolutionary who wants to burn down this whole imperial core motherfucker. I'll burn this to the ground. I'll be out there as a guerrilla trying to take forces, but nobody's fucking ready. Nobody's game to do it with me. So I had to join Palestine Action. It was my only fucking option to not want to kill myself because it's fucking disgusting, this planet. Do you know what I mean? It's disgusting. And I can't, that privilege isn't enough. Do you know what I mean? Obviously, I grew up in fucking poverty and all that, so that helped radicalise me. I wasn't paid off with fucking consumer products and all that shit. What can I say? I fucking hate this fucking imperial core. How much do other people hate it? How much do our listeners really hate the imperial core and what the imperial core facilitates? And for me, I believe that Palestine is the last fucking hope of humanity to survive against fucking capitalism and imperialism. Because if Palestine literally goes, it all ends up fucking Israel, or they end up with a fucking Palestinian zoo so the fucking Zionists can look at the Palestinians just like they looked at fucking black people in fucking Belgium in 1948 with fucking human zoos. If Palestine goes, what the fuck is the point in any of us being here for? Why? Are we just gonna live to be wage slaves? Are we just going to live not just to be wage slaves, but be wage slaves at the expense of the suffering in the global south, of the murder and poverty and everything and all that? How are people not as mad as I am? Do you know, I'm disgusted at I'm honestly getting mad calling myself a Marxist and a communist sometimes when so many Marxists and communists are doing these protests and shit, and I see them on the fucking Instagram and that, and I'm like, what the fuck are you doing? Do you know what I mean? Do something more. So I joined Palestine Action because Elbit Systems is Israel's largest and number one supplier of weapons, and they've got 10, or they had 10 sites around the UK. Palestine Action shut down 2 with specific direct action. That is like telling the forces that be, no, it's like instead of asking the forces that be to dig us a well, it's like saying we're going to dig a well and we dare use to stop us. So I mean, hundreds of activists, yeah, have went up and dismantled their arms machines, like smashed up these buildings. I've personally smashed up UAV drone engines, just shut down a factory for over 3 weeks, done other operations that I'm not even at liberty to fucking say. But I'm telling you now, like, I'm ready to take this fucking Elbit Systems down to the fucking ground. And I've got a fucking son there, yeah. Anybody who's a communist or a socialist, yeah, and you have kids, and your kids grow up, and then they look at your political activism, and then look at you now, and you're just a fucking working class Imperial core motherfucker with bills who's not taking any risk, who's brought about no social change. How could you live with yourself and call yourself a socialist, a communist, a revolutionary or nothing? You know what I'm saying? I mean, honestly, if I was a Palestinian, I'd have fucking been martyred by now. I'm telling you now. I've got to go back to the police station on the 25th in 4 days and find out if I'm being arrested or not. So, I mean, I went off on a tangent there, but what can I say, Tyler? Like, all I am is just somebody over here just trying to get people to actually have a fucking heart, do you know what I'm saying? And to actually care and to just be absolutely furious and like, what the fuck else can I do?
Yeah. Well, I can tell you that, you know, you were saying, like, if Palestine goes but the people in Palestine don't think that Palestine will go. And, you know, that is what we should always keep in mind. People in Palestine, people enduring the genocide, people enduring ethnic cleansing, all of that, they don't think that Palestine will go. They believe that Palestine will be liberated. My grandparents, they believed that Palestine was going to be liberated. My parents do also. And I also do, and the people on the ground do. And so we need to keep that hope alive outside of Palestine for Palestinians in exile. And you also need to keep that as your purpose if you're trying to be as involved as you are in the Imperial core. You know, like, Palestine will not go. Palestine will not go. Palestine lives on. In exile, Palestine lives on through Palestinian refugees, through what we do for Palestinian organizing, for Palestinian liberation. Palestine lives on through our grandparents telling us stories. Like, my grandpa was older than 25 when he was exiled. He was older than me when he was exiled. He had lived an entire life and was exiled from his homeland and refused the right to return. And so Palestine lived on through him, and he passed it on to his children and his grandchildren. And that's what, you know, we're going to keep going. We're going to keep doing until Palestine is free, regardless of how long it takes, hopefully within our lifetime. And I can say that, you know, the political engagement and the readiness that I'm seeing specifically in the UK to be, you know, as engaged on the ground as the people of Palestine Action, like, it makes me feel good. Not good, but it makes me feel like, you know, there's hope that people in the Imperial Core actually care enough to put themselves through, you know, all of that to shut down an arms factory. And so imagine, you know, with educating the masses, with talking to people, with getting people involved, getting people engaged with revolutionary politics, all of that. Imagine what we can do in this part of the world. If people in Gaza, who, like we've mentioned several times, are living in an open-air prison under a 17-year-long air, land, and sea blockade, are forming resistance groups that are penetrating the occupation's Iron Dome, which is funded by billions of US dollars. If they're able to do that, living in an open-air prison, then we should be able to do way more than that, living in the Imperial Core. And, you know, having the freedom of direct action, like the freedom to access to direct action, access to groups like Palestine Action. And so I would love to see more groups like Palestine Action coming out here, like on this in North America, on Turtle Island, because for me, like, that is the only way forward. And like we both said, protests can't be enough. They shouldn't be enough. Protests are just one one of the things that we can do, one of the tools that we can use to radicalize people around us, to let people know about what's going on in Palestine. Just like podcasts are, one of the tools that we can use for, attempting to educate people, attempting to talk about this, attempting to spread revolutionary politic. But at the end of the day, if there's no direct action, then what are we doing? We're just, talking. if we're not doing any direct action, then we're just talking and we're being intellectuals and talking about what we read and all of these Marxist texts and whatever. But,
Yeah, I mean, even Lenin himself said that, like, protest aren't particularly revolutionary. Protests are a method of, like, measuring and counting, how much support we've got, and then also showing the state how much support we've got. But that's, again, just in terms of saying who's on the side, let's find out. But now that you find out how many people are going to show up, then do something with that, and as a form of direct action. The only protest that I truly support and love at the minute as a form of progress are the protests directly outside Elbit System sites in the UK or other weapons manufacturing sites specifically, because it does fucking inhibit the operations. It does get keep the managers on their toes. And yeah, podcasts are another way. A lot of podcasts, again, are just for that fucking social clout as well. But a lot of them can be extremely resourceful for people who are obviously wage slaves, and if they can listen to some education passively, that's good. Revolutionary Lumpen Radio is obviously agitation propaganda. I want to agitate the life out of like these Marxists until it goes in towards the revolution. So, and that's why I'm so mad, Tara. I'm not so mad at everybody in the UK. I'm mad at like Marxists, revolutionaries, communists who have even worked within the past, who aren't on board with Palestine action, because as a Marxist you should be an international. I mean, you're talking about like, and it ties into what I said about Palestine being like humanity's last resistance, because to me it is like, if we do let Palestine fall, then they're going to let their own state fall on them. These people don't give a shit. Like, we have to free Palestine, as in to know for a fact that we can free every other fucking country and nation. The way I see it, you've obviously seen that graph or the few images where it shows Palestine in like 1943 or something, and then 1947, and then you see Palestine's territory shrink. You've seen that photo. People have seen those photos, and then the next one is up to us how much of Palestine's going to go, because I know that from the Nakba, Israel would have just taken all of Palestine in one day. If it could have, it would have took it all in 1 year if it could have, but it's had to slowly make incremental land grabs, stop international backlash, I think. So it's had to slowly do this, slowly take land, and it is up to us to resist in the Imperial Court, to be louder, and in that way there's more eyes on Israel, so they can't just like uninhibitedly continue to take land without like international resistance. So I do think that it is up to us to, obviously, if you've got arms factories in your country, join Palestine Action. We'll give you sledgehammers, crowbars, and we'll give you everything you need to bring that place down. And why not? Do you know what I'm saying? Why not? How can you live with yourself if you don't? Are the questions that if anybody wants to be a guest on the show and tell me why they don't do any of this, you're more than welcome. However, it won't look very good on you. But again, for Marxists specifically, I do say, if you don't do this, stop calling yourself a Marxist, because it makes the rest of us look bad.
I mean, like, one of the craziest things is that there's a communist party there of colonizers. Like colonizers have formed, they have their own communist party, and they do these like protests. And one of the, I think, most disappointing things is that there's a lot of Palestinians who are high up in that party, and even Palestinians inside the 1948 territories who are engaging with the occupation's like electoral politics too. Palestinians that have formed the Palestinian Authority, signed the Oslo Accords to form the Palestinian Authority, that facilitate those incremental, like, systematic land grabs that you're talking about. And so they need to go down too. It's true when people say that Palestinians on the ground are resisting two occupations. There is the Zionist occupation, and then there's also the Palestinian Authority that's collaborating openly with the occupation and benefiting. Like, that's where their class and social interests lie, in collaborating with the occupation. And so the PA also needs to go down with the Zionist entity because it's only an extension of it.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, and also, historically the case that there's every time there's somebody being colonized, there's also natives who are help facilitating that, a class of it.
Right. Fanon wrote about this. Even Mao wrote about this. Mao wrote about the comprador class and how it's a section of the bourgeoisie that ends up just working for the imperialists, working for the colonizers. And that's essentially what the Oslo Accords were in the 90s. Where Palestinians who ended up forming the PA, like Yasser Arafat, were colluding at first with the occupation. So secret collaborations, secret negotiations, just negotiating land and negotiating ethnic cleansing and negotiating genocide, eventually to sign the Oslo Accords, which formed the Palestinian Authority, which not many people know was only supposed to last 5 years. And now it's been almost 30 years. The Palestinian Authority has been in control of the occupied West Bank. Of course, I mean, even when they do elections, they don't do elections. Last time they didn't do elections, but even when they do elections, who's going to end up, working for the Palestinian Authority except people who are benefiting from the Palestinian Authority's presence? People of that comprador class who are benefiting from, first of all, they're part of the bourgeoisie, so they're benefiting from exploiting the Palestinian working class and peasantry. But they're also benefiting from the occupation's presence on Palestinian land. They're facilitating annexation of the occupied West Bank. They're facilitating the military occupation of the occupied West Bank. They're sharing addresses and maps and the names of Palestinian organizers. I mean, why does the Palestinian Authority have the same people on their hit list, or the people they want to arrest, as the occupation? There's no reason other than those people are a threat to the Palestinian Authority because they're a threat to the occupation. I mean, last summer, the Palestinian Authority assassinated one of the biggest and, most radical organizers in the occupied West Bank, Nizar Banat, who was openly critical of the Palestinian Authority. He was just assassinated. And there's no reason to assassinate someone who is critical of a regime, of a puppet regime that works for the occupation, other than you want that puppet regime to sustain itself, to keep existing, because you benefit from it, and you benefit from the occupation, you benefit from the genocide. And so you facilitate it. You facilitate it at whatever cost, because of where your social and class interests lie. They lie with the Imperial Court's interests and with the occupation's interests.
Yeah, very interesting. What class was that? The Commodore class?
The comprador class.
Comprador.
Which Mao talks about. So basically a section of the bourgeoisie that ends up essentially selling out the national liberation struggle for their own class and social interests by serving the imperialist colonizers and occupiers.
Interesting. Yeah, I'll have to do more research on that. It reminds me of when Malcolm X described the house slave, if you recall that speech.
Yes, Malcolm X does talk a lot about people who are, oppressed, people who are oppressed by the US, by the Imperial Court, who end up taking that oppression, finding out a way to benefit from that oppression, and siding with the imperialists, siding with the oppressor. And speaking of propaganda, this is one of the things that we are inundated with, that Palestinians even are inundated with, that the Palestinian Authority is, the only reason that a Palestinian state even exists. I mean, even when you look at now articles or reports about the Palestinian president, Mahmoud Abbas, They don't call him president. They call him leader of the Palestinian Authority. There's no such thing as Palestinian Authority is the only reason that a Palestinian state exists. Palestinian Authority's only function is to act as a distraction and to act as a lapdog of the Zionist occupation. And that's what they're doing.
Tara, thanks so much. We've brought out a lot. I think we've both struggled to formulate what we've got in our mind. But again, these are things that like we're struggling with ourselves because we don't have a whole lot of resources. How does somebody from the Imperial Corps ask somebody with a Palestinian background, what can we do? I've never really seen that. Hopefully it shows that we are trying to constantly push things to new places and attempt new ways to reach people, educate people, agitate them and bring them into the struggle. However, I think we've only got like one or two more questions, so I won't keep you much longer. But I would like to ask you one very much on the fly. If you don't know, just say, I don't know, because I got asked this question. I think I responded, talked for like 5 minutes, and then in the end was like, yeah, I don't know. I'm just going to have to think about it. And as soon as I know, I'll get back to you. But it was a really fucking interesting question and something I've thought about since. I was wondering whether you'd be able to help me develop it and answer for the comrade because I still haven't given them one. It was actually when I was getting one of my pre-action interviews taken for Palestine Action. And I was stood there with all the gear on, my fucking hammer and all that just ready. And then I got asked this question and it blew me mind because that's when I made the connection between my privilege being in the Imperial Corps and my privilege also being able to serve Palestine Action. And then, the differences in the conditions between growing up in Imperial Corps and Palestine, for example. And then they asked me, they said, can you talk about the connections between the colonization that's happened in Britain and how it's currently taking place in Palestine? So that is to say, would you say that in a way, British land has already been colonised by kings, queens, lords. They've already took all the land. We don't own any land. We're born landless. We're born without property. Propertyless. We're born without any of these things. They're already taken. They're already colonised. If we want water, yeah, it's there. But obviously we've got to pay because it's all privatised. Everything's fucking privatised in the UK. However, is it like that in Palestine? Or are we seeing what has taken place on Britain through feudalism or capitalism only now get to Palestine and then try and convert that land into like the capitalist state that we have in the Imperial Corps? Do you kind of see that taking place, or is he just like that too far away of a connection?
I think I understand. Maybe I think I might do the same thing you did, which is talk for 5 minutes and then be like, what, I don't know, remove all of that. But I'm gonna try to think through it. I think I understand what you're trying to say. But I think for Palestine specifically, the objective of those land grabs, the objective of annexation, the objective of, stealing that land and dispossessing and displacing people is, at the end, the formation of an ethno-state, of a self-segregated ethno-state that is a Jewish supremacist ethno-state. At all costs. That is the objective. And there are other reasons to benefit from that, which is, the connection to the Imperial Corps, the connection of the Imperial Corps to the Middle East, the Levant, like having a military base there, having even capital interest in that land. But there are very different reasons why that land is being taken and occupied and, all of those things. But I understand your question correctly. Given that Palestine was colonized by the British before the Zionist occupation, and also given that even back then, there was a section of the Palestinian bourgeoisie which was collaborating with the British to facilitate that, colonization. There was a section of the Palestinian bourgeoisie that was sabotaging the strike that happened between 1936 and 1939, where Palestinians went on a general strike, basically to resist the economic conditions that they were forced to endure because of British colonialism. There were Palestinians back then who were, basically doing what the PA is doing right now, sabotaging that because they don't have an interest in liberation from colonialism. And so I don't think that that would be something that we're seeing now. I think that was something that has always existed with the presence of the Imperial Corps in the region. Not just in Palestine. I mean, Jordan was also colonized by the British. Lebanon was colonized by the French. So yeah, I don't know if I answered your question, but it is a very interesting question that I need to think about.
Yeah, thank you very much. Again, it all brings out real context. Because if I just had these thoughts within mind and kept them in my mind, I'd probably just come out like delusion. So I've got to share them with somebody so they can like moderate me on it.
That's what we all need to do to bring people into struggle. Part of it is, talking through the contradictions, criticism, self-criticism, all of that is how you bring people into struggle.
So I think the whole point why they asked me was to try and tell the people who would watch the video just to try and connect what they experience here with what they experience there. Obviously, that's going to be near impossible. I'm not a poet, so I'm not going to come close.
Right. They're different conditions. They are different conditions where, the main purpose of, the presence of the royal family or whatever is capital interest. And the main purpose of the Zionist entity is, along with capital interest, it's the formation of this ethno-state. And so they're just different goals that are sort of sometimes, not all the time, achieved in similar ways. Of course, we're not talking about ethnic cleansing like in the UK, on British land by British people, but yeah, we can definitely draw parallels between the way that people are oppressed.
Definitely. We don't have ethnic cleansing over here. We do have social murder, but obviously if there wasn't an international community, Britain would commit just kill all the peasants and fucking hang them and all that like they would. But this international community and the fucking UN and all that kind of slows them down from doing that shit because these imperial bourgeoisie are always competing with each other on the international stage as to who's the most progressive and all that bullshit, but it doesn't actually mean anything.
The UN is going down with the Imperial Corps. I think that's what we need to remember.
Anyway, it hasn't even got an army or anything to enforce anything. It's just words, isn't it?
Yeah.
Oh no, the UN has got an army, hasn't it? It's got them blue helmets. I think I'm thinking of the Human Rights Council or something.
I feel like it might be white helmets or something, but at the end of the day, the UN is also just a way to slow everything down, not to stop everything, not to find a solution from the ground up to destroy all of these systems of oppression. At the end of the day, all they do is slow them down. Yeah.
Yep. Okay, so I don't know whether you've covered this one. You could just say Palestine Action. You could just leave this one out. But what groups can you vouch for as doing the right thing, as doing the right work in the UK and US, so that we can go and support or replicate what they do in solidarity with the Palestinian resistance?
In the UK, Palestine Action, one of the best examples of direct action. In the US, the mapping project that basically maps all. It was started in Boston, but I hope to see it more. I hope to see it expand more nationally or even transnationally. Basically, what the mapping project does is that it's an interactive map that exposes institutions' ties to the Zionist occupation. So police departments that are trained by the Israeli occupation forces, schools that are very heavily involved with the occupation, funding it or being funded by the occupation, groups, parties or organization, all of those things, the mapping project exposes all of that. And so that, I would say, is a really good example of a stepping stone for direct action. So now we have all of these organizations mapped, right? But what do we do about it? And that's where organizations like Palestine Action come in to implement that direct action, to stop those organizations from functioning, to shut them down, essentially, at the end. So yeah, those two groups come to mind.
Yeah, awesome. And obviously, don't be coming on saying, oh, not everybody can do Palestine action, Shibby. You're being this, you're being that. Obviously, we know not everybody can do it. Certain people have got certain responsibilities. Certain people don't have the physical ability. We know this, but we're just saying if you're able-bodied and you've got you haven't got flipping kids, so you got to look after 24 hours a day and that, you can do it. So come and do it with us. I'll leave a message in the show notes. I'll leave a note in the show notes. I'll leave a link even in the show notes so you can come up and join our Palestine Action workshop.
Yes.
And if you actually can't do Palestine action, if you actually can't do direct action, what you may be able to do is support it financially. It does literally buy sledgehammers and ladders and crowbars to destroy these things, or even fund getting actionists to a site. You can also just share everything on social media, like literally just move your thumb to a screen and you've liked it, you've shared it. It's like the least, like so little effort, but obviously it can expose us to a lot of people and help recruitment hugely. Showing up to the protest outside of the actual factories is one way to do it, because you're not going to get arrested for that. But as we know from Oldham, kicking Elbert's Oldham factory out of Oldham was largely down to the constant community support. The community come out and got them out. It wasn't just the actionists, it was the constant protest as well. So they were like as important as each other in those roles. The mapping project, again, has got a huge potential. It does seem to literally trace the DNA of, say, the military-industrial complex when it comes to Israel, and you are able to trace where everything goes, where they come from, where one part of one thing is developed, where it goes to become another thing, where they go. And yeah, that's really exploring the genetic code of this system that we need to annihilate.
Destroy, crush.
But so that's pretty much all the questions. Have you got any final thoughts or comments, anything like that?
Oh God, I can't think of anything right now except find a way to do direct action wherever you are. And yeah, Palestine will be free. It will be. Hopefully within our lifetime, if not within the next lifetime, within the next generation's lifetime. But it will be free. One day, from the river to the sea, we're going to see a free Palestine, 100%. I believe that.
Hell yeah. Thank you so much.
That's okay. I can add that there are many ways to be in community with people and to be brought into the struggle, and also to join people in the struggle. And if you are in a position to financially fund groups like Palestine Action, to pay people's bail, to donate to mutual aid fundraisers even, that is one of the ways that you can be involved in direct action from where you are. If you don't want to, or you can't be physically there, shutting Elbit down, maybe you can get someone out of jail,
Absolutely. You can also attend court when actionists have got court. I've got court coming up soon. I've wanted to see other actionists in court, but I'm sorry I haven't, comrades. It's because I'm poor. I can't afford to travel around the country. But if anybody does want to see and support me when I'm going to court, you're more than welcome. Palestine Action will share that. Okay, so thank you so much, Tayo. I've learned a lot. I've got a few things to think about. I hope you know I'm not a deeply academic person. You probably realised that, but I do hope that nevertheless this was a conversation that a lot of people can find easy to understand, informative, and to know that we've genuinely tried to bring out, some of the most important issues. Mm-hmm. So where can people find you to support and follow your work in the future?
Oh my God, I'm on Twitter mostly. So Tara, TARAX, and then RH. And my Instagram is linked there. And on Instagram, usually I work with the Gaza Mutual Aid Collective, where we do fundraisers for families on the ground, for medical needs, all necessities. But yeah, on a daily basis or whatever, sometimes I tweet really stupid things, but every now and then there's some good political analysis on my Twitter.
I was actually going to comment before you went that your Twitter does make me laugh. It's really good social commentary. You do like oppose machismoism and like sexism. You seem to like quote tweet that and then like kind of, make the person who said this, derogatory comment look bad. And that's really good. We need people to obviously support like against that kind of abuse, and you with your platform do that. And I think that's great. It has made me think about like, am I going to look like a creep if I like this tweet or something? It's made me think twice about it. So, but again, yeah, it's important.
I'm glad. Yeah.
So,
and also, we connected through Twitter, so it's a really good platform to form these connections, to even find texts to read, find films to watch. I think with all of its faults and all of the horrifying stuff that we see on Twitter, at the end of the day, if you follow the right people, it's pretty fun and good.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, thank you. We'll love you and leave you. We always sign off, so I'll say to everybody else, don't forget, workers and lumpen of the world, unite. Tara, thank you so much. So what I'll do is I'll edit this down as a video version for YouTube, but I'll clip it at certain bits. And same with the audio version, I'll just edit into an MP3 and then upload it onto a public feed and Patreon. If you do have any ideas for maybe, I've wanted to do this in the past, but if you have any ideas for audio clips that you maybe want to insert through the episode, I can do that. You just need to give me a resource if it really helps, add like an extra layer of education or anything. Just let me know. I've tried to do that in the past, like I say, but everybody speaks fucking Arabic and we speak English, so nobody understands anything.
Oh, I actually have a good George Habash interview that I can send to you, and it's where he says that Zionism is fascism. And he speaks in English. I will find it and send it to you. Okay, yeah, I found it. Should I send it here, or through email?
Yeah, you can just pop in the Discord. I'll get it.
Okay, I don't know how to do that. Wait, I don't use. Oh, I found it. Okay, here you go.
Boss, thank you. Okay, I'll love and leave you. If there's anything you ever need from us at any point, please do not ever hesitate, Tara. Be happy to help in any way, shape or form. Just let us know.
Thank you so much for having me. Yeah, it was great talking to you. Would love to talk to you more. Maybe in the future.
Yeah, we can do that again. Like I say, I just seen all your base tweets and that for so long, and I was just like, fuck, how do I... It's like, it's never going to happen. I'm probably going to make a dumb tweet one day, get unfollowed, and then blow the chance forever. Okay, boss, yeah, I'd love to have you back at some point. As for the subject, if you think I want sooner, I'm all ears, but if I think I want, I'll definitely let you know.
Okay, for sure, yeah.
Boss, love and solidarity, comrade. Until next
time. Thank you so much.
Little man never did exams, got a particular bigger plan, flipping grams when a bigger man in his gang gave him a stick to bang. Or maybe just hokers, no one thought he would kill a man till he caught a silly Billy villain chilling in the jam, sipping sham, spliff in his hand, triggered in the jam. Bang, bang, biddy, bang, biddy, biddy, bang. Now he's in the camp, what a pity fan rappers are yapping and flapping their lips about how they're packing and clapping their sticks. Has to be big, the impact it has on the kids. Tell me where the factory is. The government killed it, just stacking their chips. You wonder why the youth them are strapped and they're pissed. If not a nine, it's a knife getting jabbed in your roof. People die for the petrol and gas and our whip. In London, you can get shanked in the heart, still the government put more text in the rock. Ignorant little spitters are talking greasy, cause they bitten bits that they saw on TV. If all you rap about is the holes in the dope, it's already too late. You sold them, you sold. You jokers, act like you know but you don't, cause there's little kids dying all over the globe.
My lights out on nights out, but days in, spent blazing. Didn't tell me to navigate ways in the mazes. But why out, it's right out, amazing to think. Now let the revolutionary sing.
Stand up for your rights and fight for revolution. Free your mind and so ignite the Constitution. Cause they're killing us all. They're killing us all.
Revolution is needed, the truth, I speak it. If I gave you food for thought, would you eat it? I don't really know, it's silly though, cause if I promo your product in my video, then you give me gold just to act cool. But if I chat sense, it's whack fools act all backwards and blackpool. Big time pricks when wanna kill our music bit by bit. Take a look at the 696, is it Armageddon or the start of recession? The architect said we're far from the essence. We know the answers but aren't asking the questions. All the past lessons, we can't just forget them. Sheep MPs are like weak MCs, say they won't stop till we get free. Probably too busy playing on your PS3. Wanna